All right, welcome everyone to Telling Your Story with Data. Thank you for joining us in the last session of the day. So you've stuck around. We do have the keynote after this, but the last breakout. So I know many of you, but in case we have not met, I'm Sarah Brightwell, and I'm the project director for the Office of Indian Education Technical Assistance Project. And so I'm usually just around on all the different things. But for today, all of us are going to be focusing on data. Everyone's favorite. Everyone loves data. So we're going to talk about what in the world is data storytelling. Maybe you're familiar. Maybe you've heard the term, but you're like, not exactly sure. Or maybe it's completely new to you. We're going to talk about the key elements that are contained within that data storytelling. And then, most important and most fun, transform your messages into impactful data stories that will resonate with your audiences and explore some tools that might help you be able to do that. So as we get started, if you have not located the chat, over on the side of your page on the right side, there should be a chat area. I would love to know, what types of data do you collect? And specifically, I know everybody's collecting data for their APR. But outside of that, what other data do you happen to collect, if any? If you just primarily collect APR data, that's fine. Just put that, you don't have to list all the different, but just kind of put typically just APR data. And I'll give you a minute. Pop in some thoughts. Let's see. Thanks, Pachi. Yeah, we're always getting that APR data, particularly since we're in APR season. Right, tracking attendance. Good. Seeing some more APR. All right. Anybody out there tracking anything beyond that? Information on student goals and how we can reach them. And Rhonda, I'm curious, do you mean like student enrollment or the goals of the student? Surveys about programming, okay. Nice. All right. So I'm going to keep us going. So I know why you collect APR data, because you have to report it. But why do you report any of the other data that you're gathering? Why would you take the time to collect any other data? So when you're getting like the surveys and the attendance, student goal info. Okay, student performance data, their attendance, grad rates, test scores. Oh, cultural participation rates. I like that. And then the language participation. Nice. Thanks, Jim. So if we're not gathering it for our required OIE grant reporting, why are you doing that? Pachi also, yeah, the number of UPIC speakers. Are these other things that maybe you have to report for other funding sources? Is it because you're just curious? Are you using it for another purpose? Okay, for internal information. Okay, and then reporting for another grant. All right. So I think it's interesting to know just this little tidbit that research has shown that less than 0.5% of the data that is typically collected is ever analyzed and used. That's very little. So think about it when you think about your own data. How much of what is being collected, of that information you're collecting somewhere, truly is getting analyzed, looked at, talked about, broken apart, and used? I have a feeling for a lot of you, it's more than 0.5%, partly because if nothing else, you have to look at it a little bit to do your APR. But how much of it are you really digging into? So when you think about it, when you get your data results in, and some of you are already kind of sharing this, that you share it internally. Who are you sharing your data with? So you share it with OIE, your APR data at least. Where else is it going? Who on your internal team sees it? Who outside of your internal team ever sees it? Yeah, and I see Native Advisory Parent Committee. And I love the not much and not enough. Not because we don't want people to see your data, but how true. I know when I was running programs, looking back, I mean, a lot of the data unintentionally was top secret. I saw it, but not many other people. Sharing with your director, principals at schools, administration. Hired a native data consultant. That's exciting. Nice. All right, so you don't necessarily have to, you're welcome to answer this, but you don't necessarily have to. It's more of a think about, but why are those the only people that are seeing our data? Just kind of mull that over. I know personally, a lot of times it was just because it wasn't required. No one was asking for it. And it just didn't often occur to us that anyone else was interested in all this data we had on our projects and our grants. But as you think about it, is this process really working well for you? Do you feel like you're spending time collecting the right data that's giving you the right answers and that it's getting out to the right people? In other words, are you getting the most out of your data? Are you making it work for you? And that's kind of a question we'll take into what will hopefully maybe inspire some different thoughts around that. I want to see a few more answers pop. Thank you. So a lot of times when we think about data, particularly as OIE grantees, this is what we think about. We think about our APR, completing it, getting the answers in there correctly, getting our data turned in on time to OIE. If we're reporting it out to others, a lot of times the reports that I see coming in from folks look something like this. and this is just a random example. This is not from any grantee because I wanted to be sure that didn't distract anybody. So it's a random report, but it's often something like this, very wordy. Maybe kind of bulleted out if we're trying to be a little fancy, but it's a lot of stuff. When I see our school doesn't like to share test data with families because I think they're worried on how low some of the scores are. And I understand the concern, but do our families deserve to know that information? Would our families maybe be more bought in to participating in some things if they knew that? Just think about. So, and if it's not a report, maybe we've made a nice chart. And a lot of times might look something like this. This one is, again, just a random chart about working from home, what people liked about it. And there's nothing wrong with it. If I want to find an answer, I can look in there, I can get my answer. I wouldn't say it's particularly riveting. I don't know if any of you are looking at this like, oh, this is an exciting chart. Maybe. So what I want us to think about as we're looking is we're going to think about a different way of looking at our data. We're not going to be looking at it as an APR. We're not going to be looking at it as a report. And we're going to branch out beyond just a simple chart. But in order to do that, I'm going to need two thoughts from all of you. So get your typing fingers ready and thinking caps on. What is one really exciting data point for your program? And if you don't have like an exact number in front of you, it's okay, because we're just going to use it here. So if you tell me 47, it's really 46, I'll never know, and you can fix it later. But a really exciting data point for your program. Might not even be a numerical data point. Might be qualitative. I'll give you a second to type those in. And if you're thinking, I don't have really exciting, I have a little bit exciting, I will take that. Might just be your favorite data point. Okay, Pachi. 90% of students progress. 100% of students in Yupik language pass the post test. Okay, so everybody passed it and 90% made progress. That is exciting. Seven, the number of students on track to graduate soon. I like it. Oh, it's fine, Pachi. Yeah. Listen, you have data that shows consistent improvement each year. Like it. Yeah, the data that's really exciting doesn't always have to be like everybody's doing fabulous. You know, it's the old turtle and hare, slow and steady wins the race. If we're making that consistent improvement every year, I find that very exciting. All right, if you're still typing your exciting data for me, keep going. But I'm going to tell you the other the other piece I need for us to go forth. What's one message or data point that you would like to communicate more effectively? Maybe it's just a message about your program that you're like, I wish people knew this about my program, but I don't know how to best share it. I don't know how to best convey that information. I was seeing the numbers in attendance rise and the students, yeah, being willing to receive that support that you're offering. Very exciting. Thanks, Roseanne. So think about, and like I said, again, this could be a data point or it could just be a message in general that you're like, I wish I had a better way to convey this to people. How we've been doing it maybe isn't working the way you love. Maybe you haven't even tried to convey it because you're like, I'm just not sure how to express this. For instance, like the low test scores. And so maybe that's something, you know, if the data is showing that students are not improving, how can we effectively communicate that without really sounding like things are going poorly? Let's see, Conrad, we're collecting data on the number of permitted and licensed drivers we're producing from your new driver's ed. Yeah, which I think is very, very cool. Terrifying because, you know, teen drivers, but so important to college and career. Okay, so Pachi wants to share that your tax dollars are being well spent through grants for our kids. Don't we all want people to know that? Okay, so let's see. The number of tribal students benefiting from tribal language classes in this whatever number of schools and districts. So identifying the benefits and benefits and impacts of the benefits. All right. Yeah, so really showing the benefits of students being involved in language class. That works. Let's see, communicating with students and families that Karuk Education is here to support and serve, not that there is something wrong. Yeah, and I think that's something that I hear from grantees a lot, that sometimes it can be challenging because you want to provide these cool things that you have and this great support, these wonderful programs, but sometimes students or families might feel like, well, but I don't need help. Nothing's wrong. And it doesn't have to be that something's wrong to be able to get great things. Absolutely. All right. So these are great. Again, as you're thinking, if you're like, I can't pick my message yet, or I can't pick my data point yet, feel free to keep sharing, but I am going to get us now into our next chunk so that we can take some of this information and see what we can do with it. So we're going to explore another way of looking at this data. So I'm going to walk you through the process. We're going to look at some examples, and then we'll go from there. So data storytelling. This that you see here is an example of taking that not super riveting data from earlier, that report, that chart, and making it just something that's a little more appealing to the general public. It's the exact same information, the exact same information. But you can see they added an image, a little bit of a casual font, which probably speaks to the audience that they're looking to attract. There's more color. And it kind of just boiled it down. And that's really a lot of what we want to do with data storytelling, is be able to take the most important parts of your message and pair it with visuals and narrative that drive that home most effectively. So let's look a little bit at the actual process here. So the most important thing is understanding to get to data storytelling, there is a little pre-work. And that entails you need to be data literate. Before we can embark on storytelling, we have to make sure that we're data literate, which is to have the knowledge necessary to gather, analyze, synthesize, and convey information graphically and in writing to support decision making. And I know that's kind of a big thought, but I guarantee all of you are data literate because you are immersed in data from your grant all the time. But not everyone on your team may be. And there are a lot of great resources to help build up those data literacy skills. Or it may be that you feel data literate, but you want to bulk up your own skills. So if that's ever of interest, happy to point you in the direction of some resources there. But at its most basic, when you're data literate, you're able to take this data and either use it to help you make a decision and or use it to show why you made a decision. And within the context of a lot of our learning environments, it's really that ability to interpret and use multiple data sources that we have coming in effectively to improve what we're offering for our participants. And I think, like a lot of you were listing all the different things that you might be gathering and collecting or have access to. And even if you're just collecting APR data, that's a lot of data. And it can feel like you're just inundated with it. And so we really have to be able to then take it, break it apart, make sense of it, and think about how we can use it to improve our programs, to improve our staff, our teachers, our program leaders, and ultimately how we can improve outcomes for all of our participants. So that's the ground level. That's what we have to have in place. To then be able to move to data visualization. So that's really then when we can take that data, maybe we're putting it into charts or graphs, we're at least able to kind of break it down. And it's going to help us better memorize the data and digest it. And then ultimately, our hope is that we can move to this data storytelling where we can then use that to help persuade and make informed decisions. So the idea of data storytelling, which I always enjoy this visual, I don't know, I think it's because I'm imagining reading Rainbow mixed with data storytelling, but that probably is also just telling of me in general. But that's where the idea of this data storytelling comes in. We're going to combine all these pieces with your data and your story so that all of it comes alive for your audience, for your stakeholders, for the people that you're trying to share this information with. And I think a great way to think about this is we're going to take the narrative, we're going to take the data, and we're going to take the visuals, and we're going to mush them all together to hit that little perfect orange sweet spot. Because you could see our goal is to explain, engage, and ultimately enlighten. But we're going to need all three pieces. Now, in our chat earlier, we started already gathering some of the data and some of the narrative. We're going to build that out and pop in some visuals. And the research really backs up the use of data storytelling. So you can see 63% of folks and 5% of folks. What this is from is actually a book called Made to Stick. And they did an experiment with some classes at Stanford, and they were asking students like, hey, go and research a topic, and you're going to give a 1 minute speech. So, I mean, these folks were not talking for a long time, but go give a 1 minute speech. And in that 1 minute speech, you're either going to focus solely on the statistics. And you have 1 minute. So you're going to share like 2 to 3 statistics. Or you're going to focus on telling a data story, a story about those 2 to 3 data points. So those who focused on just the statistics, and again, they're only focusing on 2 or 3 for a minute, only 5% of people could recall even one of the statistics they shared later. So few. Of those who told a story, 63% could recall at least one data point from their story. That's a pretty significant difference. And think about that in your own life. When you go to a training or a meeting and people are spouting statistics, how much of that just resonates and sticks in your brain? And then think about when you're maybe out in the community, sitting with a student or a family member, and they tell you a story about the impact of the program or something they did in the program. How much of that sticks with you that you can remember the next day to share with someone? Those stories connect with our brains. They turn on little receptors in our brains that no matter how impressive the statistic is, just doesn't do the same. And actually, there is a psychologist, Jerome Bruner, who did his research in a similar vein and found that we remembered stories 22 times better than facts alone. So I'm going to share these lovely statistics with you so it'll stick in your brain. But maybe this will stick a little bit better. So you can see when it's just data, how much value is found in that information and how much it drives action. Versus if we filter out the data and just give certain, what we find to be the most important data. Okay, people find that a little more important, a little more possible that they're going to be spurred to action. If we give them a visual, okay, we're getting up there a little bit more. They like that. But if we give them a story that really does spur them to action at the greatest levels. So those decisions that are being made or the calls to action are spurred by emotion of story with the logic of data, with a nice visual tacked on. And it also just kind of builds that bridge between a dry data point and this great information. So where can you start if you want to do something like this? And I see some of you sharing, yeah, reporting season can feel really stressful. I agree. And so I do want to encourage you, yeah, that some of the things we'll talk about today, you can absolutely incorporate into your reports to make it feel more personal and hopefully make you feel like you're sharing your story a little more effectively. So Albert Einstein said that if he had 1 hour to save our planet, he'd spend 59 of those minutes defining the problem and only one actually saving the world. And I think, what comes from that is the idea that the more time we spend thinking about the message we want to share, instead of just solely looking at the data piece, you're going to find value in that. And it's not that we don't want to look at our data, because absolutely, But think about, okay, what am I trying to figure out? Because typically that's the two things we're trying to do with our data is solve a problem or share a message. So really spend that time thinking, okay, what problem am I trying to figure out? Or what message am I trying to share? And really delve into that, talk with your team about it and get that truly laid out before your next piece. Once you have that laid out and you feel like you're in a good place with that, then go to what data do you have to support or illustrate this message? Which pieces of information that you've been collecting pertains to this? So, like for Pachi, if she's trying to show that tax dollars are being well spent on these grants for kids, so she's looking at her grant. What data do you have that shows how effective the grant is? What data do you have that shows a good bang for the buck? What's going to pertain to that? Or, for Roseanne, think about what do you have that would show what you get out of the services? So maybe the outcomes of the services. Or maybe also sharing some information, not personally identifiable information, but general information about the types of students who participate in your services. So for many years, I ran out of school time programs in an inner city middle school. And the school that I was in for most of that, about 70% of the school was considered high need, high poverty, uh, and about 30% lived in mansions. I mean, just multi-million-dollar mansions. And it was a very weird mix. There was really not a middle ground in the school. And I had a parent come up to me one time because I'd given her child a registration form for the after school program because I really thought she could benefit from it. And she handed it back and told me that my program was for those poor kids, not for her kid. I took a very long, deep breath before responding to said comment. But that is a time, amongst other times, when I was really happy to be able to respond with the data that actually my program had very diverse enrollment of students, and that students from all socioeconomic levels were experiencing benefits of the program, such as so, thinking about some of those things, profile of, a student in the program. And then the last thing I want you to think about here is what is your call to action? So if you share this message, you share your data story, what would you hope someone would do with it? And again, this can really vary. So do you want them to join your program? Do you want them to vote in an upcoming election on a certain issue? Do you want them to partner with your program? Are you maybe recruiting staff and you want them to join your program that way? Maybe you're just wanting to increase the awareness of your program. So it really can be whatever would be useful to you. But think about, we're not typically just having these conversations for our health. What do you want someone to get out of this? And even when you do your APR reporting, what would you hope that your program officer does with that information? And that's going to help you as you craft that story. So these are the questions that I encourage you to talk through. Again, ideally with a team. It's always nice to bring those other viewpoints in. I think you get a little more well-rounded view, but think that through. And then we're going to actually start building. So as we're building, we're going to go through the data analysis process. And I think a lot of you are probably familiar with this, even if you don't call it this. But like we talked about on the last slide, so we defined our question. We are collecting the data. We're going to clean the data. That's always the most fun part, right? Always my least favorite part. And then analyze the data. And then when you get to the data storytelling, we're going to visualize and share those findings. If you would like to know a bit more about the data analysis process, we're not going to dive in too much to that today. But there's a good resource right here on the slide that you could check out or reach out, and I'm happy to dive in more later. But for the sake of today, we're going to just lightly touch on that. And I think the other thing that I like to point out is there's also different levels of data analysis. And depending upon what you want to do with that data and what maybe your call to action is going to be, you may not need every level. Okay. So as we are kind of looking here, you can see there's descriptive. So for instance, they're looking at just what happened, and you might be looking at just, okay, how many participants did you have? And like for them, they have 50 employees left the organization in the last 10 days. That's concerning. Maybe you see that last year you had 50 participants and this year you have 30, or this year you have 70, jump in either direction. So if you start looking at the diagnostic level, looking at your data and what does it tell you about why did it happen? So in their instance, oh, well, management was being difficult. They were demotivated. The next level analysis is if you're trying to figure out, well, what could happen? So for them, oh, Chris, and I see your question. I'm going to ask my assist here in the room. Is the slide deck showing up in the resources?
No,
No, it is not.
no.
All right, we can fix that. Yeah, because you're welcome to all of these slides. So we will fix it. It's not showing up momentarily. All right, so what could happen? If turnover keeps increasing, it could be up to 30%. The business reputation could go down. Prescriptive, if we get to that level of analysis, we're looking at, okay, well, what can we do? What are we going to do next? Maybe we need counseling sessions, start talking to these employees that are feeling so poorly, start boosting up training so that they feel more supported. And then the ultimate level of data analysis is actually then using it for action, getting to that action piece and making decisions with it. And so they ultimately decided they need to develop a comprehensive training program for the employees as well as the managers. Because remember, when we were back down at diagnostic, we know those managers it was not panning out. So that kind of goes through that whole process. And like I said, not every piece of data are you going to go through all 5 levels with, but many you may. And it's kind of nice, I think, to have those steps. And then we're going to take it and we're going to find the story. So this, I think, there's a lot of, if you go out and look, lots of steps to data storytelling options and articles and images. I think this one lays it out pretty simply, which is we need to figure out who our audience is. So at this particular moment, am I preparing data for my APR? And my audience are the program officers and then eventually legislators. Maybe I'm preparing information for tribal council. And so I really want to make sure that I focus on that audience. Maybe I'm meeting with all the principals of the schools we serve. So that's my primary audience. Because you may craft that story just a little bit different depending upon which one it is. Then you're going to figure out, okay, based on that audience, what's my main goal? Which goes back to those questions earlier. And then picking that right piece of data or pieces, and then start outlining your story. Because we want to craft a compelling narrative. Let the data guide your narrative. And this is where, sometimes we need to share data that is maybe not exactly the data that we would like to be sharing. But that's okay. Let that data help guide your narrative. Then we're going to add in the visuals and then edit and test your story. So I like to test my story on both at least one person who's going to have a clue what I'm talking about. So think about those people on your team. And then at least one person who really is not involved with your data or any of that information. So they don't have a lot of background knowledge, and see if they understand your story. Because if they understand your story, it's a really good sign that you have a clear, compelling story. So that might be a friend, spouse, anybody that is willing to hear your story, but that isn't intimately involved with it. So let's see what some of this might look like in action. I will show you some examples. And I saw that was one of the questions was, do you have examples of what data storytelling can look like and sound like? So yes. So I want to remind you, because this is what we're looking for. So when you see these examples, I want you to think about, okay, were they able to combine some data with a nice visual and some narrative? Do I get a message? Do I know what in the world I'm supposed to get out of this? So, okay. A lot of you may be familiar with this. This is the Spotify end of year Wrapped thing. It's very popular. I didn't even have Spotify until maybe a year ago because I'm apparently very behind the times. And yet I knew what Spotify Wrapped was because everybody felt the need to share their Spotify Wrapped on social media because they thought it was so cool that Spotify knew who they were listening to, what artists, what songs, how many minutes. Let me just say, 268,435 minutes seems like a whole lot to me. Maybe it's not as many as it sounds. It sounds like they're listening to music just all day, every day, versus our friend with the red Spotify Wrapped who's only got 21,000 minutes. But you can see it's fairly easy to figure out what they're trying to share with us. Just boiled down. Now, of course, this is not vital data. Taking it to more serious information, but still able to look at this graphic. How easy is it for you to get the message out of this? And this has pretty limited narrative, but do you still get the background narrative? Give you a second to look it through. And you can see one of the things that I like is they kept the coloring pretty basic, but particularly in this top part, not only did they give you the overall information, but they went ahead and called out, here's the most important thing I'm hoping you get out of this chart. So this is one that I think is kind of a nice way, particularly when we're trying to share. When you think about maybe you're sharing a couple of data points that circulate that same topic. This one is actually an ad. So I hear from folks all the time about staffing, whether it be for teachers or other positions on your program. And so I think the nice thing about this is it's very clear, it's very easy to read. As you read through, because I know you'll only be able to look at a couple, but some of it is serious, but then they also put in some lighthearted as well, like strong immune system. Primary teachers are exposed to every little cough and sniffle from every child, including the one with a dubious grasp of hand washing. A strong immune system is a must to cope. So that's also kind of catching for someone who's looking at jobs out there. They've seen a lot of different just blah job postings, but it's very clear what they're looking for. And they've got a nice way that you can then reach out to look at positions. And if you have thoughts on any of the ones we're looking at, feel free to share that in the chat too. We're gonna look at a couple of others. Oh, I'll be honest, I thought this was animated, so you'd see one and then the other, but we'll look at both. So let's look at our potato friend first. So for our potato friend, they were trying to share some health information. And you can see my takeaway being, while I shouldn't eat tons of potato chips, I can probably eat a lot of tater tots and it's going to be okay. I mean, they're really far down on the not less fried end. And so while again, the general data, not that serious, it was actually being used as part of a health campaign. And so it was conveying important information there, but it's also just super easy to be able to gather what they're trying to share with you. Maybe not the tater tot message. And then the books in my living room, it may have been because I was just talking to someone about some library woes at their school, but this person was actually sharing from a personal standpoint. They're quite the bibliophile. They had all these books. And so 58% of the books they have are fiction. Then they've got nonfiction, art. But I think it would be a great way that you could share about the need for more Native literature in the library. Because you wouldn't have to stack up every book in the library. You just stack up representative. And it would be a very clean, simple way to share about that. And then this is one of the last ones we'll look at. But again, one that I think really clear, something similar could be used with some of our programmatic data. So here it is looking at the trajectory for a girl and a boy at different points in their life. And in particular, this is in sub-Saharan Africa. You can see girls are actually more likely to survive to age 5. But then as we get into their formative years and their education, they're going to get at least 2 fewer years of schooling than their male counterparts. And you can see when they get down into that part where they're building their family, 21% of them are getting married as children. And then as they get into those household family years, you can see that they're spending significant amount more time on unpaid care. And then finally, those who are in the workforce, a significant gap in who's even in the workforce, let alone the pay. And so it represents multiple data points in there, but it very clearly, with a fairly simple narrative, tells the story. So I hope this is getting your gears thinking about what something could look like for you. The other thing is I do want to share with you that there's also the internal look, because you're not necessarily going to create a graphic like this for just your internal team for all your data stories. But something that can be equally important is potentially using something like a data dashboard. So this is an example. It is a made up example, but of a data dashboard. And I know some programs have some things like this. I think a misconception often is that you can't have something like this because it would cost a lot of money or it would be super hard to set up. You can set up something like this in Excel. You can set up something like this with a number of free online programs that can help you take your data and put it in a more manageable format for you to then use for your internal decision making as well, both yourself and the rest of your team. So something to think about as well, just as we're thinking about data, what to do with it, and that internal data story when you're having these internal conversations are just as important as the ones that we're sharing out with external folks. So just wanted to at least throw in one example of that as well. So as you looked at those different examples, did you see how they were combining? They had data, they had visuals, and it told a narrative. That doesn't mean that it necessarily, was writing out the story, but it was there. And I like to also kind of share, and this, we will not have time to go all the way to this point today, but the last piece is you being able to then present this as well, because you want your data story to be able to stand on its own. But also when you have those opportunities to share that, go for it. Have that's verbal story ready as well. All right, so I want to be able to share a couple of resources with you in the time we have remaining, which I know is not a ton. Okay. Let's see. Yeah. So this is some just resource on developing out your story. So I actually used to teach English way back in the day to junior high students, to 8th graders. And we would talk about this very thing when talking about how they could write their stories. Well, the same process works for all of us as adults in the workforce. We just have a little fancier graphic for it. So you want to set the background. It is really easy for us to assume that people understand where we're coming from, that they understand our communities, that they understand our schools, that they understand our kids. Don't assume. We see this a ton in grant proposals. A lot of times the grant proposals that we get in for the various grant programs assume that all the readers have all of this background knowledge. Your grants aren't being scored by the OIE program officers or the OIETA team. We're not involved in it at all. You have to assume, and this is whether it's an OIE grant or any grant, really good tip, assume they know nothing. Nothing. So set that background. And the same happens when you're telling that data story is, when you're thinking about your audience, really think about truly what background do they have on this situation? How much background do you need to provide or context for them to understand this? And then we move into the details. You want to give those supporting details. They're going to give further insight into what you want them to know about, which is likely either the problem that you're trying to highlight or the opportunity that you're trying to highlight. And you want to make sure that you include in there your aha moment, which is that big main thing you want them to know. So maybe that's that big exciting data point that we talked about earlier, where you've got all the kids making progress in the language, or you've had a 40% increase in program participation. Maybe you want to highlight a dilemma that we've seen a 20% decrease in student performance on the benchmark or the SAT or whatever. So it could be whatever aha moment you want, but think about what is that key thing. Might be your message that everybody can benefit from what you're offering, or that it's well worth the investment. And then finally, you want to guide them on through to, again, that call to action. And you'll see here lots of great ways to think of it. You want to guide them toward the solution, guide them toward the next steps, guide them towards your recommendation. That's that call to action. What should they do now? Now that they have this information and you've enlightened them and engaged them in information, what's next? What should they do? What should they think? And that will be that you have a full story. If you've got the full storytelling arc there, the next thing you want to do is take that beautiful story you just crafted and think like a designer. So in those images you saw, you'll notice your eye was drawn ideally to what was important, whether that be through the images that were used, the colors. On the one, how they kind of had the little call out to help draw you into that aha piece. Pick a good color scheme. I don't have in this presentation, but in some I've done where we have a little more time. Sometimes I'll show you some really bad examples of data storytelling. I love color. My house slightly looks like a rainbow exploded. But when I'm making something like this, I have to tone it down. It doesn't mean I can't use bright colors, but I probably shouldn't use all 72 of them. I've got to channel in, pick a color scheme and stick with it. And I'm going to give you a resource, in like 2 slides on if you're like, oh, no, that is not my forte. There are resources out there that will give you a nice color scheme and then you can just use it. Think about the right visual. Not every type of chart, not every type of picture is the right one. Again, think about simple and to the point. You want your message to shine with the visual just backing you up, more so than the visual to shine with your data kind of trailing. Okay, so it's putting on that designer hat. But there are tools to help you with the designer hat because I know that's not all of our forte. So, how do you maybe even pick what visual to go with? So, if you're looking at different types of maybe charts, graphs, this is from extremepresentation.com. I think gives kind of a good idea of, okay, what am I trying to share? Am I trying to compare something? Am I comparing between a few things or am I comparing across time? Okay, and it channels you over. So if I'm trying to go among things, is there just two things that I'm trying to compare as far as variables or one? Okay, and you can just kind of look at some options that way. Now, if you really want to get fancy, I do enjoy this next resource, but just take a deep breath because it can seem a little overwhelming. This one is Chart Guide. And you can download this yourself. You can print it as a beautiful poster. I pull it up and just like expand it really big on my screen. But it's really nice. So the way it works is you go to the top. Let me bring my mouse up here. So you're going to go to the top and there's these categories. And so think about what category you're trying to represent. So for instance, let's look at just categories. That's going to be purple. Within that, the top row is going to be the most simplistic options. Down through the bottom row is going to be the fanciest options. You'll also see like their thoughts on it. So for instance, like the gauge, not recommended, not their fave. They like this vertical waterfall, but you'll notice that's further down. It's a little fancy. They like a pictograph. They're not a big fan of the word cloud. Doesn't mean you can't use one, but this is just their kind of guidance. I think in the red, when you look at relationships, you can definitely see like starting out with like a funnel chart or a Venn diagram. Very nice, simplistic, easy to use. All the way down through like this chord diagram, I think is really cool. I personally have not used it because I have no clue how to, but I aspire to figure out a purpose for a chord diagram. So this is one available totally for free online, but it can help you. And it also has some really great do's and don'ts over here to help make sure that you're making the best use of any visual that you include. And then these are just a few things that I find useful and that are available either completely free. All of them, of course, like everything has like a paid upgrade version, because of course, but they at least have like a baseline free version. Um, Within that, the ones in particular that I would kind of point out, one is just don't count out Excel. Excel could do a lot more than you always realize. And I can see Cindy shared in the chat, and I agree. Canva has a lot of great resources. They also have a great discount if you're in education or you're a nonprofit. So if you want like the fancier version, but it will make you some really nice things without you having to have a really strong design background. Flat icon is something that I use very frequently. You've probably seen in many of an OIE PowerPoint. They have really nice, clean visuals that you can use for free as long as you attribute to them, or you can, of course, get a paid package. But the other nice thing is you can change the colors. So if you find something, it looks really nice, but it's not the colors you need, you can change that. Those are really nice. Presentation Go, which you can see at the bottom. Great for presentations, but also it just has a lot of really nice charts, graphs, visuals that you can take and make your own, but are already built for you. So really, really easy to use. The coolers, which is just in general hard to say, is where you can get color schemes. So if you're, again, kind of like, I don't know how to pick colors, it will put together pleasant colors for you. It will tell you the codes to put in to get those pleasant colors in other places. Um, even if, say, you have a color you already like because you use it for your program, but you're wondering like what other colors might go with it, it can help you figure that out. So just kind of a neat little resource. And then Infogram, Visme, and Data Wrapper are all resources, again, to be able to build. So sorry. Build different visuals and plug in your data sources where it'll help you do all of that. So just kind of a quick overview of some different resources you may want to check out that, again, are completely free, particularly if you're just starting out and you want to kind of play with it. So we're getting near toward time, but we still have a little bit left. And so I really would like to ask a couple more questions in that time that we have left from all of you. And I've been watching your chat here. I see we recently provided a brush dance education class and initiated a youth cultural practitioner mentorship program. We recorded a lot of video, and on the last day, the brush dance students presented to their school at the award assemblies. We had a professional photographer come in and interview the students and the youth cultural practitioners. That sounds amazing. And that is the type of thing that, I mean, think about if you took just a piece of that video or a picture from that, along with some of that information from the interviews. How could that help you tell the story of your program? What need might that fill? So, what I would like to know, because we've talked a little bit about data storytelling in the past, and it seems to be something that there's some interest around. So it really helps us as your TA team to know, do you want to talk about this more? Is this something you would like to learn more about? Would you like additional technical assistance here? Some things that we've kind of batted around before is doing something more as like a workshop where you could bring some of your things and we could actually create some things, play around, and actually try out creating some of your own stories. Are there other tools or resources that would be helpful? I love a good research project. So even if I don't know the answer, if you need something, I'm happy to source it out for you. And then finally, what questions are still in your head that you're like, I came here today, I wanted to know this, or that all this may be brought up for you. So yeah, if you have any thoughts on any of those, I would absolutely love to know. In particular, yeah, do you want to go further deeper? Do you want to do more with this? Do you want to play around with it, try it out? Particularly as we head into the summer, that was a thought, was we could do, more of a workshop time because you'll have finished your APRs. We could grab some of that data and try it out. I know there is interest in the data dashboard, which I think those are super cool. That's definitely something that, if that's of interest, we could delve a little deeper into how to set up one of those yourself and how you could do that. So feel free, share any thoughts, questions. That's all just super helpful as we think about where to go next. But also, like I said, if you have any questions, both about the content we talked about today or what you want to think about next, happy to answer those in the last couple of minutes we have together. And then because I've plugged this in everyone else's sessions, I do have to at least remind in this one, before we fully wrap up, if you could remember to take the session survey over on the right side too. All right, so yeah, I think a workshop would be helpful. I'd attend a summer workshop. Yes, continuing the conversation, more tech assistance. Yeah. Yes, I agree. Longer would be great. Definitely, definitely. Cause yeah, I think my personal thought is, yeah, that the next step I would love is to be able to, you know what you're getting yourself into, bring your data and let's dive in. Yes, we're working on getting the slides up. I'll also have a list of all of you that joined the session. So if it doesn't get up before we leave in a couple of minutes, I can just email it to all of you because I conveniently have all your emails. The perk of being behind the scenes, I know how to reach all of you. I see the question about where can we find the data dashboard. So the one I showed is just an example. It was from Microsoft BI. But if you're interested in data dashboards, I'm happy to give you some additional resources on how you can create those yourself. But yeah, that was just a generic example to kind of show you possibilities. All right. Well, we only have 2 minutes left in our session. So after this, we actually have the closing keynote. So just a reminder to stick around. That will start at 5:45 Eastern, so 4:45 Central if you're here in Central Time with me, or 3:45 Mountain, 2:45 Pacific, 1:45 Alaskan. So definitely come to the closing keynote. And then, like I said, if nothing else, I'll email you all the slides. And we'll see what we can do about having more of a workshop-y session where we can dive in. Yeah, and I see Doris is very conveniently also popping in that since it's the last day, after you've watched that closing keynote, be sure and complete the feedback survey for the whole event so we can get your thoughts on the whole PD meeting. Oh, Cindy, thank you. Yes, we want to make APRs less stressful and make data fun. I want everyone to join me. I like to say I'm a data nerd, so we can all have fun with our data, make it festive, make it work for us. Making sure I didn't miss any other questions from y'all. All right. Well, then I think we're all set for today. Like I said, if you think of any other questions, though, this chat will stay up, as well as I know you all know how to contact us at the oie@seiservices.com. I'll also pop my email into the chat. I think most of you have it, but just in case you don't, let me type it in here. And like I said, I'm happy to answer more questions after the event as well. So have a wonderful closing keynote. Fill out that end of event survey, and we'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.